The most important watch in the history of space exploration was never designed for space. It was designed for racetracks. In 1957, Omega released a chronograph built for car drivers who needed to time-lapse and measure speed. It had a sleek black dial, a stopwatch function, and a tachymeter bezel for calculating how fast you were going. Nobody at Omega had any idea that this little racing watch would one day be the only thing standing between 3 astronauts and death in the vacuum of space. To understand how a racing chronograph ended up saving lives 200,000 miles from Earth, you need to know about a man named James Reagan. In 1964, Reagan was a young engineer at NASA who was given a seemingly simple task: find a wristwatch tough enough for astronauts to wear in space. In the early days of the space program, astronauts just wore whatever watch they personally owned. Nobody had really thought about whether those watches could survive the extreme conditions of spaceflight. Reagan sent out a formal request to 10 different watchmakers asking them to submit a chronograph for testing. And here is where it gets interesting. Of those 10 companies, only 4 even bothered to respond. Hamilton sent a pocket watch and was immediately disqualified because NASA had specifically asked for a wristwatch. That left 3 contenders: Rolex, Longines, and Omega. NASA then put all 3 watches through an absolutely brutal series of 11 tests designed to simulate the worst conditions imaginable. They were baked at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. They were frozen. They were subjected to near total vacuum. They were blasted with violent vibrations, and they were slammed with forces of 40 Gs. The Rolex failed first. During the humidity test, the movement simply stopped running. Then, during the heat test, the sweep's second hand warped and jammed against the other hands on the dial. The Longines failed next. Its crystal warped and literally popped off the case during the heat test. That left the Omega Speedmaster standing alone. It was not exactly in perfect shape either. The luminous paint on its dial had completely crumbled away during testing. But critically, the movement was still running, still accurate to within 4 seconds a day. 1 watch out of 3 had survived, and it was not even built for this. On June 1st, 1965, the Omega Speedmaster became the only watch qualified by NASA for all manned space missions. For the next 5 years, it did its job quietly and reliably on mission after mission. It was on Buzz Aldrin's wrist when he walked on the moon during Apollo 11, but the Speedmaster's defining moment was not the moon landing. It was a disaster. On April 11th, 1970, Apollo 13 launched from Kennedy Space Center carrying 3 astronauts. The crew were Commander Jim Lovell, Command Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Hayes. This was supposed to be the 3rd moon landing, routine almost. The public had already started losing interest in moon missions. 2 days into the flight, ground control asked Swigert to flip a switch to stir the oxygen tanks, a completely routine procedure. But deep inside the spacecraft, a tiny spark from a faulty wire ignited in the oxygen-rich environment. Seconds later, a violent bang shook the entire craft. Swigert radioed Houston with what might be the most famous understatement in history. "Houston, we've had a problem here." The explosion had ripped open an entire panel of the service module. Both oxygen tanks were failing. Lovell looked out the window and saw something no astronaut ever wants to see: gas venting into space. The spacecraft was bleeding oxygen into the void. Power was draining fast. The water supply was collapsing. 200,000 miles from Earth, with no way to turn around, the spacecraft was dying. The moon landing was immediately abandoned. Now the only mission was survival. The crew scrambled into the lunar module, a craft designed to support 2 people for 45 hours on the moon's surface. It now had to keep 3 men alive for 90 hours in deep space. To conserve every possible watt of power, nearly every electronic system was shut down. The temperature inside the cabin dropped close to freezing. Condensation formed on the walls. Critically, the digital mission timer went dark. Here's where it gets terrifying. As the crippled spacecraft swung around the moon and headed back toward Earth, it had drifted 60 to 80 nautical miles off course. That might not sound like much, but in orbital mechanics, it's the difference between life and death. If the spacecraft hit the atmosphere at too shallow an angle, it would skip off like a stone on water and bounce back into space with no chance of recovery. To correct the trajectory, Mission Control calculated that the crew needed to fire the lunar module's descent engine for exactly 14 seconds. Not 13, not 15, 14. And without the digital timer, someone had to count those seconds manually. Jack Swigert strapped on the Omega Speedmaster. Some accounts say it was actually Jim Lovell's watch, passed to Swigert because it had been serviced most recently and would be the most accurate. Lovell positioned himself at the controls, using Earth's terminator, the line between day and night on the planet's surface, as his only visual reference to keep the spacecraft pointed in the right direction. Swigert watched the chronograph hand. Lovell pressed the ignition, and for 14 seconds, the fate of 3 human beings rested on the accuracy of a mechanical wristwatch that was originally built to time car races. The burn worked perfectly. On April 17, 1970, 142 hours and 54 minutes after launch, Apollo 13 splashed down safely in the South Pacific Ocean. 40 million people watched it live. The crew received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. 6 months later, on October 5th, Omega received NASA's Silver Snoopy Award, one of the agency's highest honors for its contribution to the success of human spaceflight. The award features a sterling silver Snoopy lapel pin because NASA had adopted the cartoon dog as its unofficial safety mascot, a watchdog, if you will. And here is what makes this whole story almost poetic. The Omega Speedmaster was never supposed to be a space watch. It was a racing chronograph with a stopwatch and a speed calculator. Omega did not lobby NASA. They did not even know their watch was being considered until it was already being tested. They just happened to build something tough enough to survive conditions it was never designed for. Every piece of technology on Apollo 13 was purpose-built for space, custom engineered, rigorously designed, and when it all failed, the thing that saved those 3 men was a mass-produced wristwatch you could buy off the shelf at a jewelry store. It is still the only watch qualified by NASA for spacewalks, and it still says so, right there on the caseback. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe for more untold stories where a single object changed the course of history.